Hello and welcome. In the interest of time, I think we'll go ahead and get started today with our with our webinar. There'll be folks slowly joining, but I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce what we're doing. So welcome to the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative Winter Webinar Series. This is the third and final presentation for 2026. My name is Jamie Ellis. I work as the Natural Areas Coordinator at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I am part of the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative Advisory Team. Oh, here we go. There we go. Um, I'm also assisted today by Amanda McCulpin, who's also on the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative Advisory Team. The Prairie Reconstruction Initiative is a community of prairie practitioners and researchers from more than 30 organizations with support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working together to discover ways to improve the practice of prairie reconstruction. Our mission is to build an engaged community of practice who work together to overcome uncertainties through all phases of the prairie reconstruction. We envision prairie reconstructions that are biologically diverse, ecologically functional, and resist invasion by non-native plants. We focus our activities on evidence-based tools and peer-to-peer learning. We developed a prairie reconstruction vegetation monitoring protocol and built a prairie reconstruction database that we maintain and continues to grow. By pooling and analyzing data from many reconstructions, we hope to reveal pivotal elements that will increase the likelihood all reconstructions meet expectations. Our learning opportunities include both in-person and online events where the PRI community can exchange experiences and knowledge with each other. We believe these insights from both individual experiences and scientific investigation lead to our collective success. So, just some housekeeping. During the presentation, cameras and microphones will be turned off. So please type questions and comments for the speaker in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And then also at that time, I'll turn the cameras and microphones back on if you want to voice a question or comment directly. This session is being recorded and will be available later on YouTube. I'll let everybody know about that with one of our email messages. So our speaker today is Lenya Quinn-Davidson. She is the Fire Network Director for the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, where she leads a statewide team working on various facets of fire resiliency, from wildland fire management and the built environment to workforce development and community capacity. Over the last 15 years, Lenya's work has focused in large part on the human connection with fire and breaking down social, political, and cultural barriers to beneficial fire. Lenya has worked at various scales, including locally with private landowners and community members, at the state level, where she collaborates on policy, research, and training, and nationally and internationally through her leadership. Oh, gosh. There we go. Back to the right side. Here, let me get back on track. Lenya has worked at various scales, including locally with private landowners and community members, at the state level, where she collaborates on policy, research, and training, and nationally and internationally through her leadership on the Women in Fire Training Exchange Program. Lenya is passionate about using fire to inspire and empower people, from ranchers and scientists to agency leaders and young women and everyone in between. And today, Lenya will be talking about prescribed burn associations bringing fire back to the people. So Lenya, thank you so very much for being here. with us. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can start sharing your screen.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, let me just grab my presentation and put it up. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to join you all today. I'm way out on the north coast of California, calling in from Humboldt County. If any of you know the kind of the Redwood Coast, I'm about 5 hours north of San Francisco. A nice sunny day here in California. I hear that you are quite wet where you are. And I was invited to come and talk about prescribed burn associations and the work that we've been doing here in California to bring fire back to communities and to really restore the practice of prescribed fire. I'll be talking a lot about cultural burning as well. We collectively call prescribed fire, cultural burning, and managed wildfire beneficial fire here in California. It's kind of an umbrella term that we use. So you'll see that come up a lot, especially in the context of the policy work. But that photo that Jamie shared with my bio, I thought you all might like it as Prairie lovers. That was actually a photo that was taken in September of last year during one of the WTREX events that I partnered on to host in Eastern Colombia. So I was actually in the Llanos, the kind of grasslands, the plains of the Orinoco region of Colombia, where we hosted a women's fire training, and pretty beautiful prairies out there. But today the presentation will really focus on California and a lot of the community organizing that we've done through prescribed burn associations, and then also the policy work that's kind of run parallel to that community level work. So it's a small group on here today. I see there are only 14 people, so feel free to stop me if you have questions, or Jamie, maybe you can monitor the chat and kind of wave me down if someone wants to stop and talk about something. I'm totally open to that. I think with a group this small, we can have it be more conversational. So I guess just to start off, I'll say that I'm sharing this photo here. This is one of my favorite photos. And I love this photo because, for one, I think it's a little provocative. I think that some people who would see this photo might have a lot of questions about what's going on here. But for me, it really speaks to some of the core philosophies of the work that I do, which I'll be sharing with you kind of toward the end of this presentation, but that I think you'll see come throughout, which is that I think fire is part of living in a place like California, and certainly in the tallgrass prairies and the areas where you all live too. I think that people should be fluent in fire and should be comfortable with fire, and that people have always used fire in these places. And part of that story is that it needs to be intergenerational. And this is a picture of my son here in the foreground, my son Rowan. He's 11 now. This was a couple years ago when he was probably 9. And we were visiting some friends out on the Klamath River, a couple hours from here. And my son and my friend's daughter wanted to do a small burn together. And these are kids who have been burning for most of their lives. And we were there with them, and we're both fire practitioners. But I just think it's a beautiful thing when kids feel comfortable with that, when they kind of understand how it works and how to do it. And that's a core philosophy of the prescribed burn associations, that this work and fire is not just for fire professionals. It's really for the communities who live and need to thrive in these places. So I just love this picture of Rowan. And you'll see more pictures throughout this presentation of children and of families using fire. And so let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things I like to just kind of ground us in, especially given that you all are not here in California, I'm sure you know and have heard that fire is a very important process in California. We often only hear about the negative things, the catastrophic fires, the fires burning into Los Angeles, the fires that burned up Paradise. But the truth is that most of the landscapes that we know and love in California have some kind of fire story. And a lot of those are frequent fire stories. These are places that have been managed with fire forever. They're cultures that have used fire and stewarded with fire forever. And we wouldn't have these ecosystems if we didn't have fire. And of course, that's true for the prairies where you all work too. So our ponderosa pine forests, our coastal prairies, our deciduous oak woodlands, even the giant sequoias and coast redwoods, these are ecosystems that need fire, that are dependent on fire. And we kind of have a collective understanding in California now that we need to bring fire back to these places, that we need to be actively managing the landscape with so-called good fire, with beneficial fire. But how do we do that? You know, we've really been in a deficit for so long. And here in California, we've broken that cultural connection to fire. The one that was in place for so long in California has been broken for a solid century now. And we're kind of having to rebuild that culture and figure out how to bring this practice back. And for a long time in California, prescribed fire was really just a practice that was within the fire management agencies. So you see agencies like CAL FIRE, which is our state forestry and fire department and the biggest fire department in the world, really kind of owning prescribed fire as a practice and making it exclusive to the point where, you know, I mean, not just CAL FIRE, the Forest Service, the National Park Service, these agencies, these fire management agencies that are really suppression oriented in large part, kind of owning prescribed fire and the practice of fire stewardship. And for a long time, that's just the way it was in California. Private landowners, tribes, you know, community members, timber companies, other folks in the private sector were pretty excluded from the use of fire. And I started working on this when I was in grad school back almost 20 years ago, trying to understand what were the impediments to prescribed fire in California. And why weren't we, you know, in a place that really depends on frequent fire and that needs so much more of it? Why weren't we doing more of this? And why wasn't it in a focus? And at that time, no one was even really talking about it. I was inspired because I had a graduate advisor, Morgan Varner, who came from Florida, and he was the one who was like just shocked by the lack of prescribed fire in California. And we worked together on this research, and it really informed the way that I have shaped my whole career because I've been working on tearing down these barriers for so long. But one of the things that I noticed, even from looking back at my graduate research, is that in those early days of my thinking, I was really only thinking about the agency folks, you know, that they were the people who were burning. And so when I did that work on impediments, I was really asking them, what are the problems? Why aren't we burning more? And, you know, asking folks like the federal agencies and CAL FIRE to tell that story. And what I realized as I grew into my extension position, because I'm an extension agent and I lead our statewide fire cooperative extension program, I realized that I was also having some blind spots in this work and that there were a whole bunch of people who wanted to be part of this work, who wanted to use fire, who might not be fire professionals. They might just be community members. They might just be landowners. They might work for a nonprofit organization. They might be with a tribe. They're not necessarily looking to work in fire suppression and be a firefighter. They want to be good stewards of the land. And so my thinking started shifting to not only how do we do more of this, but how do we open up access for different kinds of people to be involved and to steward with fire? And how do we start shifting that demographic of prescribed fire from what we see on the left, which is this kind of, you know, classic male-dominated fire suppression, fire industrial complex kind of approach, to more of one that's community-centered and that involves tribes and indigenous practitioners, that involves ranchers, that involves other community members, and intergenerational, that involves young people and old people, and that everyone can kind of have a place in this work. And that's really guided a lot of the work that I've done over the last 15 to 20 years, is this idea of opening up access to prescribed fire as a practice. So, you know, I would say even just 10 years ago in California, as I kind of shifted my focus outside of the agencies, there was a lot that needed to be done. The laws and the regulations around this were so opaque, very unclear, even, you know, what was legal, what the liability status was, what the permitting looked like. Very few private burn bosses in California at that time. I could name all of them on one hand. No training opportunities for non-agency practitioners. And, you know, we brought the prescribed fire training exchange model to California in 2013, but before that, there was literally nowhere for someone like me to go get training in prescribed fire. Paralyzing liability concerns and very few insurance options in California. So that, and I know that's, you know, those are issues that are shared very widely I think a lot of these issues on this list are probably shared in the places where you are too. These are kind of universal issues across much of the United States. And so it's been, I think California, though this is kind of a case study of the work we've done here. We borrowed things, a lot of things from other places, and then we've also shared things with other places. And I think that geographical exchange is really important. So that's why I love giving talks like this and opening up this conversation. Little to no recognition of cultural practitioners or understanding of cultural burning. You know, now it's kind of a hot topic and you'll see a lot of media coverage on this, but in general, at that time, even 10 years ago, very little emphasis on that or care for Indigenous practice and traditional ecological knowledge around fire. And then this notion that the public doesn't support prescribed fire. That was a very common narrative, especially among the agencies, you know, like, oh, we would do more of this, but that public, we really need to do an education campaign or we need a media campaign. Like there was this idea of that it was the public's fault that we weren't doing more of this. And I found through the Prescribed Burn Association work that that's definitely not the case, and that it was really an issue of engagement, meaningful engagement, rather than education. So one of the first things that we did, and I mentioned borrowing things from other places, I will say that one of the most important moves we made in California was to go and learn from the Great Plains. And I had some connections in Nebraska, and we actually invited the Nebraskans, a little group of a Nebraskan, a rancher, a cattle rancher, a corn farmer, and his wife, and then a couple other folks who were working in Tallgrass Prairie to come out to California in 2016 and to kind of share with us what they were doing and give us some insight on how we could do better. They came to Humboldt County, where I live. And then in 2017, they invited us to go to Nebraska. So we went and spent a week in kind of north central Nebraska, burning with two different prescribed burn associations, me and my colleague, Jeff, who's also an extension agent. And then we brought one of our local ranchers with us from Humboldt County, and then another partner from NRCS. And the four of us spent a week traveling around Nebraska, burning with these PBAs and realizing that there was just no reason why we couldn't do something like this in California. And that we had what we needed to do that in Humboldt County, where I live. So we came back from that trip and we immediately got started planning a burn on that rancher's property, the one who had gone to Nebraska with us. And in June of 2017, we hosted our first PBA style prescribed burn. And it was so incredible. We had community members and volunteer fire departments and students and just this really diverse group of people. We did a little burn. It was a little 20-acre grassland burn, and so much excitement and momentum. And things have just snowballed since then. We now have about 300 people involved in our PBA here in Humboldt County, very diverse. This part of California is pretty interesting because there are a lot of different politics and different backgrounds that kind of come together here. So we have, like I said, the ranchers were very instrumental in starting our PBA, but also environmental groups. And we've had timber company involvement. We have a lot of college students from Cal Poly Humboldt. And then we also have a lot of old hippies, you know, back to the landers. That's a big component of our community here. A lot of pot growers, another big piece of the Humboldt County community. And you get all these people together who normally would never find themselves in a shared space. And they're out there burning together and learning together and laughing and having a good time. And we have burned at this point about 3,500 acres of prescribed fire here in Humboldt County with the PBA. We have more than 13 volunteer fire departments that are involved. We have a very well-developed burn trailer where people can come borrow tools and equipment, or they can bring the whole trailer out when we're doing bigger PBA burns. It's just built this whole community. And I think especially in a time when community is hard to find and, you know, people coming together around like from diverse backgrounds and stuff, it's been a really neat venue for community building. And I wanted to share a little bit about the types of burning that we do, because Humboldt County is as ecologically diverse as the people I just talked about. So we have a lot of different ecosystems here. We're right on the coast. So on the coast, it's, you know, very cool coastal climate. with the coast redwood. And then you go even 10 miles inland and it's hot and dry and very Mediterranean climate. So we have a lot of different opportunities for burning, which is great. So one of the things that we burn for is for invasive grass species. So Medusa head is one of the big kind of nasty range invasives here that we can effectively control with prescribed fire. Prescribed fire is very effective at controlling these late season invasives that go to seed long after other grasses do. So we can go in and strategically burn in the late spring, early summer. We have a couple week window when we can be very effective with Medusa head. And that's been of great interest to all the ranchers. So that first burn that I talked about in June of 2017 was a burn from Medusa head and gave us an opportunity to put in some research plots and not only build that kind of social awareness and build that excitement around the prescribed fire piece, but then also to be doing some really good ecological work and some good monitoring. So that's brought a lot of the ranchers to the table. The same kind of management practice could be done for things like yellow star thistle and for barbed goat grass that are also those late season invasives. But the Medusa head is a really beautiful example of something that only requires a single entry to have real impact. One of the other big reasons why we like to burn here in Humboldt County is for our deciduous oak woodlands. We have a couple different species of deciduous oaks that are very important from a biodiversity perspective, from a cultural perspective for local tribes, from a ranching perspective for forage. So California black oak and Oregon white oak are our two dominant deciduous oaks here. And in the absence of fire, they become encroached by fast-growing shade-tolerant conifers. So Douglas fir being the kind of main culprit. It's a native tree, but in the absence of fire and frequent disturbance, it just totally takes over. And this is a typical progression that you see where you have this really this oak woodland that's full of life and flowers and plants and tons of, some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in California are those deciduous oak woodlands. Those little conifers use it as a nursery. And even a couple decades later, you'll see like that middle photo where you have these oaks that have lost all their lower limbs. They're barely hanging on. They're reaching for light. And those conifers are so fast growing that, they're overtopping the oaks. They're quite young, but they're big. So we did a whole study, a demographic study where we cored and aged Doug firs and deciduous oaks, any place where they were co-located. And what we found is the oaks were 100% of the time older than the firs, which makes sense because the oaks cannot grow in shade. So we know that they were there first. The oaks in that middle picture are probably about 130 years old, and those firs probably about 30 years old. So the ultimate fate of these oaks and these encroached systems is that they die and we lose them and it converts to conifer forest, which, as you can see in the understory of that middle picture, are far less biodiverse, sometimes having almost no understory plants. And so we can come in and use fire to maintain these oak woodlands and prairies. And this is a really critical tool in our toolbox for restoring and maintaining our oak woodlands and coastal prairies. So I just love burning in the oaks, and especially in the winter, we wait for the leaves to drop, and then we get cold winter days where those leaves are fully available, and you can do a lot of burning, hundreds of acres with just a couple people, because the surrounding forest is too wet. If you're working in a grazed system, those grazed grasslands don't have much to carry the fire. So the fire only carries under the oaks, and it's able to kill those small conifers. So it's been a really important tool for us. And I think obviously tracks with what Native people have done for thousands of years here in California. I think these oak woodlands, especially where we live here on the coast, where it's so moist and trees grow so quickly and those conifers are just constantly trying to eat up our prairies, fire is the reason why we still have oak woodlands and why we still have prairies. We also do a lot of burning in our coastal rangelands. So, these are big kind of open balds that are along the coast here. We're burning for brush encroachment in these places. So we see a lot of coyote brush, which is another native invasive that really takes over in the absence of disturbance. And this is another picture of that same burn unit. This is one of our bigger burns that we did with the PBA. And we always see about 2 years post burn that the lupins come in. We have kind of a super bloom of lupin 2 years post fire. So this is just a beautiful spot. This is out near the Lost Coast, which is kind of in the south part of our county, the westernmost point of the continental US. So this is a beautiful area, and one where we're really starting to see a lot of the landowners want to bring fire back in. And the PBA was really the only way that they could, because the agencies weren't doing a lot of burning on these private lands, and the PBAs kind of opened the door for so much more of this work to take place. We also do a lot of work for fuels reduction and for forest resilience, and so we do a lot of understory burning. This is in the south part of our county in a Doug fir tan oak forest. And we also have done some other kinds of burns. We do a lot of burning for training, just to provide training for people. And then the photo on the right was kind of an interesting one. We had a local landowner who has a vineyard, and they had experienced a lot of grasshopper herbivory the year before. And they wanted to test out using prescribed fire around the vineyard in the early summer to reduce the grasshopper habitat and to prevent that herbivory problem. And we didn't do any official monitoring of that project, but anecdotally, the landowner was very pleased with the results. And it was kind of one of the more unusual objectives that I've ever had for a burn that I've done, but it was pretty cool. So, we were doing this work in Humboldt County and kind of testing some of this out. I mean, we had a lot of people from around the state calling us and saying, like, how are you doing this? Or is that legal? Or what does that look like? What is CAL FIRE saying? What are the permits like? And we ended up spending a couple years in 2018, 2019, traveling around the state and sharing about this model, about prescribed burn associations, about the legal context. We actually started working with an attorney to understand the public resource code and really drill in on liability status and how permitting and what is legal and what is the process. And the end result is what I call a social movement around prescribed fire in California that has just grown more than we could have ever imagined. I mean, what started here in Humboldt County has just totally exploded across the state. And we have now more than 30 prescribed burn associations or community-based prescribed fire organizations in California. Some counties have more than one. We'll have, even here in Humboldt County, we have a couple different branches of our local PBA. We tend to see that the groups start kind of bigger, sometimes even multi-county, and then as they build depth and they build capacity, they can break into smaller groups. So in some places, the PBA is at the neighborhood scale, and they're able to write grants and get tools and equipment together and stuff. In some places, they're a lot bigger. One of the cool things we're noticing is that this model, because it's so grassroots and it's so focused on the local issues, the local ecology, the local community, that has different flavors. And you'll see on this map that Los Angeles now has a PBA. It's one of our newer PBAs, a little over a year old. They're really focused on training right now, but they have the most interesting people involved. It's the actual PBA coordinator who founded the PBA is an animator. He's in the animation business and kind of interested in fire and has almost fully transitioned now to working on fire related issues instead of animation. But I think that's such a perfect story for Los Angeles. Of course, an animator would be the one who would found the Los Angeles PBA, doing really amazing work down there. But across the state, we have now thousands. I mean, I'd say probably 3,000 to 4,000 people involved in all of these prescribed burn associations, and really just building this grassroots movement that is about access to fire. It's about, looking at those photos on the left, it's about getting your kids out, having families involved, having community members have kind of authority over fire in their places. And it's really changed the conversation around fire. And I think opened up so much more opportunity for active stewardship of these ecosystems that need fire. I mean, a lot of those oak woodlands and prairies and other places that the PBAs are burning would not have been priorities for the agencies. You know, especially in California right now, there's so much focus on wildfire prevention that prescribed fire often gets framed in that context, which I always try to remind people, like, most of us who are burning for ecological or cultural reasons. We're not necessarily just burning for wildfire prevention. That's kind of an added bonus that we're reducing some fuels or something. But really, we're burning because we love our oaks, we love our prairies, we love the wildflowers. And like, these are values that we care about. They're ecological and cultural values that we care about. And that's just very resonant across the PBA world, which has been really cool. I've done a little research, especially in the context of trying to work on insurance issues in California. And I just wanted to share that I did a survey of California PBAs from 2019 to 2024, asking them about their success rates. We were basically trying to give the insurance industry some information about how successful are these groups. You know, it's a bunch of random landowners and community members who are implementing these burns. You would think that they're, you know, it might be pretty risky. But what we're seeing is that there's so much thought and care that's going into this work. And the stakes are higher for communities and for landowners who are leading this work on their own. And they're taking a huge amount of care in doing it. And so my survey showed that the California PBAs had implemented more than 460 broadcast burns with 0 escapes and no damages to anyone else's property. And these data were incredibly important to the insurance industry because, you know, they're trying to figure out how to develop policies to cover this work. And they're assuming that it's super risky because they're kind of conflating it with wildfire, when in fact, it's actually quite safe. And these groups are taking a lot of care. And the success rate is actually higher than we see with our agency partners. And the agency partners, you know, might burn on the hotter end or might take a little more risk because they're protected within their agencies. Their jobs are protected. They have all those resources behind them. And these groups don't. So there's just a lot more, it's very careful. And I also think it is so important that local people have the ability to do this work. So they're not waiting around for the agencies to do it. It's been a real issue in California. As you can imagine, I mean, California has a ton of public land and a lot of Forest Service land. And as things are so volatile at the federal level, it really puts our communities at risk. You know, a lot of the decisions that the Forest Service makes or that other agencies make are inherently political and informed by politics and budgets and things like that. And what we're saying with the PBA movement is local people need to have decision-making power, and they need to have the power to move forward with projects, even when things are crazy with the government. So that's been a powerful message too. It's really about local autonomy. It's about not needing a bunch of money to do this work. Really, we just need people power. We need people coming together, sharing resources, sharing skills, and we can do this work. So that's been really, really powerful. So all of that work, that's kind of like the community organizing piece of it that I mentioned at the beginning, that has been so powerful and has really brought people in, given them the opportunity to engage. Again, it's not about education. Training is definitely part of it, but it's not about educating people to come around to our point of view. It's really about engaging them, giving them the opportunity to be part of it, that access piece. But at the same time, we recognized that there was a real need to change some of the policies in California to better protect and enable this work. So we had these kind of parallel tracks of community organizing and then also policy work. So I wanted to share some of the things that we've been doing over the last few years, which we've seen a lot of other states in the West kind of replicating these things and doing so, like Oregon and Washington. Almost everything I'm going to talk about right now, Oregon and Washington have also done in the years since. So it's been important. I think these are important things to share because they're models that other states can grab and use and push forward. And you have us to point to as like having some success in this. Now, probably some of your states already have a certified burner program. California did not have a certified burner program. And so in 2018, we passed a bill to develop a state certified burn boss program. And the burn boss piece of it meant that it's pretty rigorous and it's not an easy certification to get. So we see in some states that have certified burner programs, that they're like, you know, a 2-day training or something, and then you get maybe some kind of benefit from that. But in California, the way that that bill was written, it was really designed to be for very experienced practitioners. So it's kind of that burn boss level. The program rolled out in 2021. And we, at this point, I was on the curriculum development committee for the program, and I've kind of hosted most of the classes that have happened in California. We now have we have 69 burn bosses certified, a bunch of other people in progress. And we had our last class in November in Chico, California. But it's been great because this certification, it's not required. And that was a really critical piece when we were working on this, is we do not want this to become required. But what we can do is we can tie other benefits to the certification. So one of the things that we did was we passed in 2021 a bill that changed the liability standard in California for fire suppression costs associated with prescribed fire and cultural burning. So we said basically, you know, if you're burning and you're doing everything right, you have a burn plan, you're in adherence with your permits, something goes wrong and you need CAL FIRE to come in and provide support, that you will not be sent a bill for those fire suppression costs. So we changed that from a simple negligence standard to a gross negligence standard, which is a big deal and really provides a lot of comfort and protection for the burner. In that same bill, cultural burning was defined and given the same protections. And that was really important. That's the first time that we saw cultural burning and cultural practitioner defined in statute in California. So a big step there. In 2022, we passed another bill that created the Prescribed Fire Claims Fund. And this is a $20 million state fund that acts kind of like an insurance fund, provides $2 million of free coverage to any project that's being led by a cultural practitioner or a certified burn boss, either federal or state certified burn boss. You can enroll your project and you'll get $2 million of free liability coverage. So in the instance that something goes wrong and you cause damage to someone else's property, this would provide that support up to $2 million. This has been hugely successful. We're kind of wrapping up our third year of this program. And we've had, I think, close to 250 projects enrolled in the fund, and we've had 0 claims against it. So again, it's that same point that I was making before, where this work is pretty safe and people take a lot of care in it. But to know that you have that protection if you need it has really opened the door for a lot more of this work. There's also been a lot, so all of these bills that we've worked on have had this prescribed fire component, and then they've also had a cultural burning component. And that's really important here in California. We have a lot of Indigenous practitioners, a lot of tribes and others who are leading in this space and who really are trying to revitalize cultural practice. And so all of those bills have made sure that cultural practitioners are on par with federal and state burn bosses, that they have those protections without having to have the certification. There is also a more recent bill, Senate Bill 310, that was passed in 2024 that gives tribes, federally recognized tribes, the opportunity to enter into agreements with the state of California to assume authority over permitting on their ancestral lands. So we have one tribe, the Karuk tribe here in Northern California, not far from where I live. They're the first tribe to enter into one of those agreements, and they now have authority for permitting of burning practices on their ancestral lands. So it's a huge step for tribal sovereignty and for bringing the kind of the cultural practice back onto their ancestral lands. We also had a governor's executive order last year. So there's been a lot of support from Governor Newsom and working with the practitioner community to try to address these barriers to prescribed fire and cultural burning. And so the executive order in October had 14 different items that address various aspects of prescribed fire and cultural burning, and just trying to further break down these barriers. So a lot of progress, a lot of support from the governor's team. I'd say we're kind of all on the same page in California now about the need for this work and making sure it happens. So, if you look at that list that I talked about, it's not to say that we're done and that we've taken care of everything, but we've really made a lot of progress. And I think that dual track of community organizing and engagement and policy work, that a lot of the same people are involved in that work, has been instrumental and just really been a game changer, or changing the culture of fire in California, because through this prescribed burn association, the cultural burning, and the policy work. Now, it's not to say that we're done. We do have 2 bills that we're working on at the state level this year. One of them is the Good Fire Act, and that bill will make the claims fund permanent. So that $20 million claims fund that I talked about, it's a 5-year pilot. So it is set to sunset in 2028. So the Good Fire Act will make it permanent, and then does a bunch of other kind of smaller things that are really important, but like minor tweaks to policy and things. The other one is the Beneficial Fire Capacity Program, where we are trying to carve out a portion of the state's funding to go towards supporting beneficial fire and supporting capacity building for it. So one thing that's been a problem in California is that everyone's focused on treating acres, like getting the acres treated, black acres, and not so much on the training and capacity building. So like the Burn Boss program that I said, I host all those classes. I have no funding to do that. So I'm having to ask private foundations to help fund course delivery. And really the state of California needs to be supporting that work and making sure that it happens. And we just haven't totally seen that yet. So this bill is aiming to provide that funding and really that kind of stable backbone so that we can continue to build the support and the capacity that we need to do this work. That's my son again on the left doing a winter oak woodland burning project. In December, with the family, we were all out burning together, and I was kind of laughing because I accidentally include this photo. He's wearing my husband's hard hat. My husband's with the National Park Service, and so like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be wearing that Park Service hard hat. But it was a beautiful burn, and you can see in the background there, since you guys are all grass lovers, that's our native fescue, California fescue, that is really fun to burn in and does well with fire and does really well with the winter burning. So I just wanted to share, in wrapping up, that I do have some kind of core philosophies around the work that I do. And I think you'll see that as I talk through these, that they connect back to everything I just talked about. But I kind of hold these very dear. And anytime I'm working on policy or working in collaboratives or doing any work, I kind of go back to these truths. So I think they're important to share. And I'm sure you all kind of have these core philosophies for the work that you do. This again is a photo in Colombia, just beautiful grasslands in Colombia. But one of them that's so core is that I really think fire is for everyone. And I really aim to create spaces, both physical spaces for training and like with the PBAs, but also just conversationally and like philosophically spaces where we can talk about fire being for everyone. That, again, kids, old people, whatever level people are at, I can find a way to plug them in and to make sure that they can be engaged if they want to. And I'll say these photos I'm about to share are all coming from different PBAs in different parts of the country. So also this idea that fire is a human and family right. And this, of course, is hugely important to a lot of the tribes that I work with here in California and a lot of the cultural burning that happens. This is a photo provided by Margot Robbins, who's with the Cultural Fire Management Council here in Northern California and has done amazing work to revitalize cultural burning practices and basket weaving. And so I think this is so important. And anytime we can get our kids out and share fire with our families, and that, I think that's so powerful and something we should be doing. And there are people in this work and in this space, especially who kind of come from that fire suppression background, who don't agree with that and who see a photo like this and feel like that's not right, or that's not appropriate. And so I really push back on that, and I try to share as many photos as I can of kids and families burning. I also really like to point out that fire is free, and that fire doesn't have to cost a ton of money. It doesn't have to be super bureaucratic. It's really about people getting together and burning. People have always burned. They didn't always have big grants to do it. They didn't always have big burn teams and crews and engines. It really just takes people coming together. And so, we see great examples of this in the PBA world because most PBAs are burning with no funding. And I should, at the end of my talk, I'll share with you a paper. We did a survey of all the PBAs in the country, because there are about 175 PBAs across the United States. And this was one of the things that we really saw is that, PBAs are generally just about people coming together and sharing resources and burning together. They're not necessarily workforce development programs. They're not, trying to build out a bunch of jobs. They're really just about people having fire as a stewardship tool. And so people can bring whatever resources they have, and it happens and it works. And as soon as we get hung up on the funding piece, I really caution the PBAs I work with here in California. When you get funding, especially from the state or federal government, it comes with strings attached, and it can actually make it so you can't do the work that you were trying to do in the first place. So be wary of funding, because fire is free. Fire is also connected to everything. And I think that's a big piece of the work in California, is understanding how it connects to water and to, fish and to everything we care about. This stuff is all connected. So I've been kind of on a mission to really engage with the watershed restoration community and bring fire into their toolbox too. We have a lot of amazing restorationists who are doing work in fisheries and the Klamath Dam removal and like all this neat stuff that's going on around watersheds and rivers in California has to consider fire, because everything that happens up above is affecting what's going on in the creeks. So yeah, that notion that fire is connected to everything, I think, is really important. And you see that in a lot of the burns, and this was a beautiful photo that was shared from the High and Palm PBA near where I grew up, just east of here. And they did this burn of a meadow and had this incredible fawn lily response that came in. They said they'd never seen so many fawn lilies as they did after that burn that they had done the fall before. So just beautiful, and reminding us that fire is essential in these places, that we have to bring fire back. Fire is a vital component of these landscapes that we live in. And that fire is beautiful. This is a photo from North Carolina. I always encourage people, we can get into a little bit of an industrial mindset with prescribed fire. We sometimes call it production burning, and you see this a lot where it's like, we got to get these acres treated and get out there and rip off these units. And one of the things that I think the PBAs, it's kind of inherent to the PBAs, is this idea of like moving at the right pace and really standing back and appreciating it and really wanting to make sure that you're meeting the objectives. Because why would you go to all this effort if you're not meeting the objectives that you set out to with the burn? So this idea that the fire really is beautiful, and that it feels good. And this again, the people have so much fun and people love being together, and it's a community building space and it's a family space. And that if you can make people feel good when they come out and volunteer their time on a project, they are sure to come back. And that's one of the things that we've seen in Humboldt County with our PBA, but also across California, is that we get so many people out and it's their first burn they've ever done. And their only question is, when is the next one? It's so human. There's something so human. It feels good, both in a fun way, but also in like a deep kind of inner peace way. It feels good to be doing something that seems right and that feels like it's having a positive impact. And so here's a beautiful photo from Southern Oregon from the Rogue Valley PBA. And I just love these kids out on this burn. And we can keep kids out of the smoke. We can keep them safe. It's not an unsafe place for families and kids, but it feels good. And people are never as joyous as they are when they're done with a good day of burning. So with that, I'll close and I'll stop sharing. I'll leave this up for a second just so you can grab my email if you wanted to reach out for some reason. But I'll pop that link in the chat as well for that paper that I mentioned. And then if anyone has any questions, we have some time.
Yeah, please, folks. Lenya, thank you so very much for your knowledge and your passion and your truths. That's a beautiful list, and I and I think others on the call or on on the line today will connect to many, if not all of those truths. Yeah, the one comment I actually typed a comment in there because it's been on my mind. I heard an update last week from some friends in our Department of Natural Resources and our land trust community here, at least in Illinois, is that there's work happening on prescribed fire legislation, which was enacted about 20 years ago. And it's really just been simple liability. Now, of course, there is uh, this is anecdotal evidence, but comes from a wide across the community is that there's not been any claims, as for any insurance claims, but our a lot of the trial lawyers and insurance folks are kind of pushing back against getting it switched from simple liability to gross negligence. But I know that there's folks here, at least in Illinois, working on that, and then also to setting up that claims fund. So that's really great. I didn't know that that those were set up in California, and so that's very very positive to hear that.
Yeah, those have been game changers for us, those two moves. And one of the things that we did with the gross negligence bill, we had originally put forward a bill that would have made it a gross negligence standard for anything related to prescribed fire, like not just for the fire suppression costs, but also for third party damages. And we got some major pushback from the insurance industry, from the homeowners insurance industry, because they were saying, well, if it's a gross negligence standard for damages, we're going to be the ones that are left to cover those costs if something goes wrong. And so I thought it was kind of elegant. We actually pulled that damages piece out of that bill. And we just have gross negligence for the fire suppression costs. And then the claims fund is there to provide that coverage for the damages that could happen. So they're kind of complementary. They work together to provide that protection, but really saying that the state should be the ones kind of covering that cost and providing that protection rather than the private insurance industry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you. Jacob writes, this might be the most inspiring presentation I've attended about fire. Good work and thank you, Lenya.
That's so sweet. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Um, I'll go ahead and ask a question. When I think of California, and fire, right? I do think about agencies and agency fire, whether that's suppression or prescription. So, but what has been the response or the attitude of the fire agencies or personnel within the fire agencies in California to PBAs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say early on, so when we first started the Humboldt County PBA, we did have a really good relationship with CAL FIRE here in our local unit. And so it was a perfect place to actually test this this idea, because a lot of people were saying, like, what in the world are you trying to do? It felt pretty outside the box. And to their credit, our local CAL FIRE people were very supportive, and they saw what we were trying to do. They trusted us, and they helped make it happen by being supportive. We didn't see that level of support in other parts of the state. So in those early days, when some of the other areas were trying to get prescribed burn associations off the ground, they faced significant pushback, and CAL FIRE not permitting projects or not believing that they'd be able to do the work. There was a lot of tension that we had to navigate. And I would say that our local unit, the people that we worked with here in Humboldt County, became kind of a advisory body for other parts of CAL FIRE across the state. So people were calling, their counterparts were calling the Humboldt people and saying, what do you think about this? Is this really crazy? Should I support it? And our local folks were saying, yeah, you should, because it's working here and it's really making it so we can all do more work. So it was, we had to navigate. There were a couple of years where it was tense and a lot of conversation and a lot of like elevating this to leadership and trying to sell it basically to the agencies. But now we're in a really great place in California. There's a lot of support, and yeah, it's good. I think it required some of that creative discomfort, which is where all the good progress happens, I think. Are the people who do prescribed burning outside of the PBAs? Absolutely. Yeah, there are nonprofit organizations that are starting to be able to bring prescribed fire into their programs. I would say that the PBAs have been really instrumental for building capacity. They're kind of like a gateway for people to get involved in this work, because as I mentioned before, there aren't very many training opportunities or places where people can get a start. And so the PBAs are offering that venue for people to get some training, learn, like build some comfort, and work toward that state burn boss certification. One of the things with the state burn boss certification is that it requires that you have a lot of experience with prescribed fire, and you have to have served in a firing boss role. So you have to have actually led ignitions on prescribed burns in order to apply to the burn boss class. The only place where people can really do that and get that experience and lead ignitions on burns is in the PBA world or in that kind of private sector, because you're not going to go on a CAL FIRE burn and lead ignitions on a burn. So that's been really critical, that we're seeing the PBAs providing this kind of nursery for prescribed fire practitioners who can then go on to develop programs outside the PBAs. And we're seeing that that proliferation in that way.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions out there? I noticed that are there folks who are still on the line who are involved in PBAs? I think who would like to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah, I'd be
about
curious too.
About, yeah, so Zach who is typing. Interesting. I just while Zach is typing, I know he's works for a Southern Illinois Prescribed Burn Association.
Oh,
Yeah, so
cool.
Zach runs
Awesome.
the Southern Illinois Burn, which is, as far as I know, our only prescribed burn association here in Illinois, which runs across a little different landscape in Southern Illinois, which is, then we have a little bit more rugged and forested and
Cool.
3.5 PBAs in Illinois as
That's
of now.
awesome. I like the half PBA. I'm curious
Sorry, I
about
didn't know
that.
I could talk.
Oh,
Yeah,
here you
so
go.
we've got so the Southern Illinois PBA, the Great Rivers PBA up by St. Louis, White and Jefferson County, they've got a newer PBA they started last year. They're calling themselves the Burn Guys, and then Montgomery County has started a PBA, but this is their first year, so they haven't gotten started quite yet, but they're forming up. So that's the half PBA
Okay,
right
that's
there.
so cool.
Yeah, great. Zach, in your opinion, what's or in your experience, what's been some of the biggest benefits of the PBA that you're involved with?
So SIPA as a whole is in my experience, very different than most PBAs. We're closely tied in with the Shawnee National Forest and the IDNR here. So we run a lot of cross-boundary burns with the Forest Service. So that's including public and private lands. So we're able to get 2,000 acre units in a very fragmented area, which you can't really do in most of the state. But so since we're so kind of intertwined with the Forest Service and the DNR, we have a lot more. I mean, we've got like paid staff, which a lot of PBAs don't have. And we just kind of operate a little bit differently than other PBAs can.
That's awesome. So glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm glad
I've
you're
never
able
been
to
to
join
Illinois.
us. Oh, go ahead, Lenya.
Oh, I was just gonna say I've never been to Illinois. I'll be somewhat closer in June. I'll be at the Oak Woodland Conference in Indiana, but I'm excited to. That's a part of the world that I haven't spent any time in.
Sure. And then across the landscape where Zach is, it is mostly forested, much more forested
Okay.
landscape, and not as many grasslands as it's in other areas that where others of us are burning across the tallgrass prairie region. So. Well, looks like we're back at the top of the hour at 2 o'clock. Hey, Zach, thanks for coming on the line. Amanda, thanks for helping out. Any last minute questions? If not, Lenya, thank you again very much for your time today. And like I said, this is at least in our series. This is our last webinar, and once I'll do a little bit of editing, and I'll get those uploaded to YouTube, and I'll let folks know. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hope you all have a great day.
Yep.
You too. Thank you so much.
You- Bye.